I'm Caleb with You Can Make This Too. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm finishing my first furniture project ever. Now at the end of this video I'm going to have the story behind this piece if you're interested, but the short version is I took this from log to lumber, started it, then some life stuff happened, and I didn't let it dry, so everything warped and went crazy on me. So I've been lugging this thing around for 6 years and decided it's time to get it done. Starting out, I have 2 leg assemblies, some panels that I'd already glued up that were supposed to become the tabletop, and some stretchers and stuff. Now, for the panels that were already glued up, the first step was jointing an edge so I can rip them at the table saw. Right now they're too big to go through my jointer or planer, so without a straight edge I can't safely rip them. For the boards that do fit on my jointer, I started by jointing an edge and a face. So when that's done, those boards will have 2 good surfaces that are 90 degrees to each other. Now I can use the good edge against my table saw to rip those boards parallel. As for the panels, now I can rip them down to widths that'll fit on my jointer and planer. I look at each panel to determine the center of the cup and then rip the board there. By ripping in the center of the cup, I'll have the most stable boards once they're finished milling, and I'll be able to save most of the thickness. Now the panels that I had to rip I face jointed off camera, and then I ran everything through the planer together in order to get that last face flat. Now if you want more details on the milling process and why I go through the steps I do, I did a separate video on that I'll link below. And once all the boards were done, I let them rest a few days, and then I sent them through the jointer and planer again. The wood didn't move very much between those 2 sessions, so I only went with 2 sessions instead of 3. Next was gluing up the tabletop, but before I did that, I ran all of my tabletop pieces through the table saw again, just to make sure that all of the edges were square to the faces and straight. Now those little steps is very cheap insurance to make sure I get a good glue up. The glue up I took in 3 stages. First, I glued up 2 to 3 boards at a time into a total of 5 panels. Then I glued those up into 2 panels, and then I finally glued those last 2 panels together. By only having to control 2 to 3 glue lines at a time, I think I get much better results. And since the pieces come out of clamps just long enough to go back into clamps, I only have to leave them clamped for an hour or 2 between glue ups, so this process really doesn't take too long. Now this tabletop is super knotty, so I taped off the bottom and then mixed up some epoxy to fill all of the knot holes and cracks. This isn't a requirement, but since meals are often shared near tables, I'm not a fan of having crevices and cracks that food and drinks can get into. After the epoxy setup, I used a chisel to remove most of it before sanding. Previously I've tried just sanding the epoxy flat, but if the epoxy is still kind of built up, I found that the sanding just heats it into a gummy mess that instantly clogs my sandpaper. So scraping first is the way to go. After I scraped off most of the epoxy, then I switched to sanding. I started at a really coarse 60 grit and sanded up to 220 grit, and I wet the wood with water before the last pass to raise the grain. To square off the table, I use my drywall square to mark the cut lines, and then use my circular saw with a track to cut it all down. With the top done, I switched my attention to getting the base finished. The previous wood movement ruined the alignment for the old joinery, so it might be heretical, but I cut the tenons off the stretchers and used them to plug the mortises on the table legs. Trying to recut new mortise and tenon joints just didn't make sense to me, so I decided to use a doweling jig and some dowels to join the stretchers to the legs. It's plenty strong for this table. Now it's less optimal, I think, but pocket screws also would have worked just fine. But if you don't have a drill to do dowels or pocket holes, you could always just use a domino for this joint. Now all that's left is applying finish and attaching the top to the base. I used my old standard of General Finishes Armor Seal, and I really love the tone and grain that it brings out of this oak. I applied 3 coats, lightly sanding with 400 grit paper in between. To attach the top to the base, I used a biscuit joiner to cut slots in the stretchers, and then used some Z-clips from Rockler. I like using these because they're super simple to install, but they do allow for wood movement so long as you install them along the expansion plane. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm about to get into some of the story behind this and some pictures from when I worked on this the first time around 6 years ago. But before we get to that, if you're not already, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving me a comment. So as I mentioned before, this table was my first furniture project I worked on. It was meant to be the dining table for me and my ex. Now, 2 trees had fallen down behind a house I was renting in Missouri when I was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood. So I got out there with my chainsaw, a little small 16-inch Husqvarna. It took me forever, but I cut these trees up and then borrowed a buddy's truck and trailer and we hauled it down to a sawmill and I got it milled up into 8-quarter lumber. Now, I knew you were supposed to let wood dry, but I didn't realize how long that took. And I didn't give enough credit to the warnings of working with wet lumber. I figured, this will be fine, I'll just do it anyways. So I let it sit for about a month and then started working on this. And I should have known I was going to have problems when it sprayed water at me while I was working it, but I didn't and drove on. But when I was in the middle of this project, that relationship ended, and then I just kind of set it to the side. I revisited it a little while later, and I discovered that everything had just warped so badly, and I didn't know how in the world I was going to try to salvage it. Also, given what this table was meant to be, I was never really sure what I should do with it or if I should finish it. Well, fast forward a few years, and my parents recently divorced after 30 years, and my mom had expressed interest in this table. So I thought it would be sort of an interesting circular story for this if I go ahead and finish it and give it to her. And I also conveniently now have the tools, and I felt the skills and experience to save this table if it could be saved. So that's what I did, and she's very happy to have it.